Excellencies, ministers, distinguished officials from the multilateral agencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to this fourth session of the Global Small Island Developing States Leaders, also known as SIDS. My name's Juliet Foster, and over the next 90 minutes, I'll be guiding you through what I'm sure will be a thought-provoking and fascinating discussion, the theme of which is Seeds for All, Hunger for None, enhancing African seed systems to benefit small island developing states. A big subject indeed. The organisers of the Global SIDS Leaders are also extremely grateful for the kind sponsorship of Bayer in supporting these debates at transnational level. So thank you so much for that support. Now, let's go into the past to take a look at the genesis of this debate. It goes all the way back to 1996, the year of the UN World Food Summit, and that declaration which underlined that universal food security can only exist when everyone has permanent physical and economic access to safe, nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and preferences. An ambition that was set to be reached by 2015 and which was further enshrined in the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the ambition of the Sustainable Development Goal number 2 is very specific because it focuses on ending hunger, achieving food security, and improving nutrition, as well as promoting sustainable farming. But whilst zero hunger is a universally accepted aspiration, it is fair to say that time is running out. Sub-Saharan Africa is not on track to meet its target of eradicating all forms of hunger and malnutrition by 2030. The numbers really speak for themselves. Let's take a look at the most recent estimates from 2019, which reports that almost 690 million people, and we're talking here about nearly 9% of the global population, remain undernourished. Now, for small island developing states like the Sub-Saharan African mainland, numbers like this really bring into focus their severe vulnerabilities and food security risks. And of course, it is a situation that has been accentuated by two other key factors, namely climate change and, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, all of which begs the questions, how do you reverse these dangers? Well, fostering increased access to nutritious food via plant-based innovations, allowing farmers to access new varieties of high-quality climate-adaptive seeds, well, that is one solution. But rolling out these techniques requires cultivation on a scale that is both affordable and manageable. Again, climate change, which I referred to earlier, has an impact with its unpredictable weather patterns, and it challenges both existing cultivation season cycles and, of course, the knowledge of local indigenous farmers. But as this debate will demonstrate, solutions that were pioneered in Africa could be adapted to the particular topographical characteristics and soil compositions of small islands. Mobile technologies, for instance, along with remote sensing services and distributed computing, are improving the access of smallholder farmers to information, techniques, and markets. But how far can they go in tackling these challenges in addition to existing economic and capacity limitations already faced by vulnerable nations? And what about the cost? It's all very well to talk about technology, but who should foot the bill for installing these new innovations? And the question must also be asked, is it possible to design climate-smart seed policies that are sensitive to different soil compositions and farming systems, and which at the same time are capable of delivering socially fair and beneficial outcomes to vulnerable communities, such as those in small island states? So there's plenty for us to consider, and they're just some of the issues that will be examined by our distinguished panel of experts. Let me give you an idea of what's going to happen. Each panelist will give a 5-minute speech, although having said that, there is room for a little bit of leeway on that. And afterwards, or rather during these speeches, they're going to outline their particular position, and after which I will ask them a question. And then, of course, we will come to a more general selection of questions at the end of this first set. So much is happening, plenty of ground to cover. All of that for later. But let's focus now by hearing some opening words of welcome from His Excellency David Doyle. Now, he is the ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis to UNESCO. He's also the co-founding partner with Ambassador Jean-Paul Carteron of the Solomon Islands of the GSL initiative.
Thank you, Juliet. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to this Global SIDS Leaders event devoted to SIDS for All, hunger for none, and perhaps importantly, its implications for small island developing states, known under the acronym of SIDS. Now, this is the fourth such event, bringing together leading experts from the UN family of organizations across the globe, multilateral and bilateral donors and countries, prominent research institutions, and of course, ministers from the small islands themselves to debate critical strategic issues of importance to the future sustainability of small island developing states. The genesis of this Global SIDS Leaders initiative was driven by the need in a very increasingly multipolar world to raise the profile of small island developing states on the international agenda. The objective is to secure a better understanding of the small islands' specific challenges, build mutual support at key transnational and regional negotiations, whether it's addressing the destructive nature of climate change or combating the spread of COVID, managing indebtedness, or as the topic of today's event explores, developing innovative agricultural technologies to meet the particular needs of small island developing states. Now, small island developing states represent something like 38 independent sovereign states scattered indeed across the globe, from the Caribbean to the Atlantic Ocean, from the Pacific to the Indian Ocean, representing 20% of the UN membership. Now, whilst we are very proud of the fact we have 20% of the UN membership, or 1/5 if you like, SIDS' remoteness, size, limited institutional capacity sometimes results in many of these islands, if not all of them, facing particular challenges in getting their collective voices heard at bilateral and multilateral level discussions. It was with this ambition in mind that my partner in this particular initiative, Ambassador Jean-Paul Carteron of the Solomon Islands, we instigated the Global SIDS Leaders Initiative to give a more assertive voice to SIDS at transnational level. Ultimately, it's through important and timely debates of this nature, such as today, on the development of new SIDS technology being pioneered in Africa with potential for small island developing states, that we seek to inscribe the small island strengths, opportunities, risks, and weaknesses on the global development agenda, and also allow SIDS to become essentially an integral part also of identifying the solutions. So without further ado, let me just also underline our deep appreciation to the sponsor of this event, Bayer, and I wish you all an enjoyable debate. Thank you.
Ambassador Doyle, thank you for those words. Let's begin with the first of our distinguished speakers, Maria Helena Semedo. Now, she's the Deputy Director General of the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, or FAO. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She is an economist and a politician from Cabo Verde, and since becoming her country's first ever female minister in 1993, she is a recognized advocate for women's empowerment and a leading expert in global development issues. Now, before taking up her current duties in 2013, she held many high-level positions in Africa. We're very fortunate to have you with us. So Maria Helena Semedo, the floor is now yours, and you have around 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Juliet. Good afternoon to all. Ambassador Carteron, Ambassador David Doyle, Ambassador Josefa Sacco, Ambassador Mario Arvelo, dear panelists, excellencies, colleagues, friends. It is really a pleasure for me to be at this fourth conference of the group of SIDS leaders. Being from Cabo Verde, addressing the unique challenge of small island development states is an issue close to my heart. And having dedicated a large part of my career to working on Africa, I am deeply aware of the complex food security concerns in sub-Saharan Africa. SIDS and sub-Saharan Africa share many vulnerabilities. These nations and their food security are fragile in face of climate crisis. Though not linked to climate change, last month, volcanic eruption and tsunami in Tonga highlighted just how hard extreme events can hit seeds. And we are seeing a hunger crisis in the Horn of Africa, for which the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations recently launched an appeal to help 1.5 million people whose fields and pastures have been devastated by drought. So, as demand for healthy and nutritious food grows, we need to improve local food production to raise food security and nutrition levels. If you look at what we produce, 80% of our food is plant-based. If you want to increase production, must largely come for adapted and resilient crops, at the same time supported by healthy ecosystem. And we should not only think about food generated by the rich diversity of forests, trees, grassland, and mangroves to complement our diets. Is not only what you produce by the land, but let's think about our forest. And we must do this at a time when soils are degrading, biodiversity is in sharp decline, pests and disease are spreading, drought and floods are frequent, and we can no longer rely on predictable growing season. And this is, we see it every day on the small island development states. In the face of this challenging, providing access to the right seeds from a diverse range of crops and varieties is vital. Crop varieties coming from our biodiversity can also bring useful new traits attractive to market, like palatability or easy to processing. Crop varieties and good plant seeds quality and quantity can help farmers increase local food production, raise income levels and livelihoods, tackle environment challenge, and increase resilience. Providing quality tree and forest seeds can restore our degraded ecosystem and agroforestry landscapes on which sustainable production hangs. This is because the most cost-effective way to deal with a crop disease or difficult condition is with a resistant crop variety. What are the appropriate crop variety we have, and with healthy ecosystem to continue sustaining basic ecosystem services for sustainable production. Though we are not there yet, efficient seed systems help small farmers access quality seeds. While the small island development states often have nutritious fruits, vegetable pulses, and nuts, nearly all seeds import 60% of their food. In Africa, only around 30% of farmer fields are planted with improved crop varieties, while over 90% of seeds have no quality assurance. We need to place seed quality and crop varieties at the forefront of action for better food production. Yet, providing high quality and diverse seeds involve a great deal of know-how, innovation, and efficient distribution of seed systems that respond to farmers, consumers, and market demands. Colleagues, reaping more with less is the only way to achieve the Malabo Declaration and food targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. FAO is committed to working with members and development partners to meet these targets. How? Through the Samoa Pathway Global Action Program on Food Security and Nutrition, through the FAO launched Seed Solution Platform, which will bring innovation, technology, digitalization to farmers and facilitate exchange of experience and good practices among small island development states. through working to demonstrate that the seed industry is an enabler for sustainable crop production and large-scale restoration of degraded ecosystem, through cooperation for developing sustainable and resilient, climate-smart and gender-responsive value chains, engender results-based priority setting for resource to strengthen local and national seed system while encouraging regional collaboration, facilitate constructive debates on innovation, and strengthen institutional and human capacities. We must all work together to make seed system in seeds in sub-Saharan Africa resilient and diverse, to ensure that farmers can access the seeds they need when they need them, so we can have seeds for all and hunger for none, and to ensure better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life for all, leaving no one behind. And I thank you. Over to you, Juliet.
Thank you very much, Maria Helena Semedo. The question I'd like to put to you is that you've beautifully outlined the challenges that SIDS face, the challenges arising from their environments and the work that needs to be done. Also, that statistic about 60% of food actually being imported. But given all of that, when you factor in the agenda for sustainable development and that goal to eradicate hunger by 2030, is it perhaps time to reevaluate that deadline? Because as we know, the hunger and malnutrition rates are rising. And if it were reevaluated, what would it mean for SIDS farmers?
Yeah, this is a very, very good question. I think if you see, we are far to achieve our sustainable development goals, and COVID-19 has made it more difficult. But to me, I don't think we should move the goal. To me, what we need is to set the bar high and to have greater ambition. It's time for us to roll our sleeves, not lose time, and put our words into action. What we need is a great scale and acceleration of our action. And this is how I can see this. If you all together, we strengthen our partnership, we restore our degraded land, we slow the effects of climate change, we tackle food loss and waste, we can still hit the 2030 target. Now is not time to give up. What we need to do is to redouble our efforts. Be together in partnership with the government, with the private sector, with the civil society, with our financial institutions. And this is how we really need to have ambition, action, and strengthen our partnership. This is how I see it, Juliet.
Maria Helena Semedo, thank you so much for your response to that question. I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, who is Peter Cannalaria, who's president of the Organization of the African, Caribbean and Pacific States Parliamentary Assembly and also co-president of the ACP EU Parliamentary Assembly. Peter Cannalaria, it's good to see you. The floor is now yours and you have around 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Juliet and Excellencies. Colleagues, panelists. Once again, it's a privilege and a pleasure to join you here in this very important discussions. Thank you very much to the organizers as well for keeping SIDS on the radar. As a SIDS person myself, I'm perhaps biased there, but I always welcome discussions on SIDS issues. Of course, very, very important part of the United Nations family as well in terms of the collective that the SIDS have. Now, in terms of Solomon Islands itself, our geographical makeup puts us as a unique position, I would say, in that we have very, very high mountains, volcanic mountains, but also we have atolls as well. So I guess in terms of geographic layout, in Solomon Islands, you have a good representation of the SIDS within a SID. We are one of the bigger SIDS, if you want to call that, in the Pacific. And we are also the biggest LDC SIDS. So that's another acronym that has also fallen upon our heads, both as SIDS as well as a least developed country, the Solomon Islands is. When it comes to nutrition, apparently we don't fare well there as well. Reports have stated that our malnutrition data is quite concerning, that a high percentage of our children, I think the latest one has it just about 31% of children under 5 are quite stunted in terms of their growth. And that is something that is a reflection of our malnutrition or the lack of nutrition that our young population are getting nowadays. And that's something that perhaps to start off with a concern, and quite a huge concern for the current population here. The government looking to try and meet the SDGs as well and the targets there. So it's something that has to do directly with what we're talking about today in terms of the SIDS, nutrition, and try and eliminate hunger as well, hunger for none. So Solomon Islands is in a position that perhaps encapsulates many of the challenges that SIDS, or 38 SIDS, face in terms of our makeup. We have mountains here. Our highest mountain is higher than anything Australia has. At the same time, we have low-lying atolls that are affected by climate change as we speak, with king tides now pushing in. So you have that collection of a wide variety. In the bigger islands, in the Solomons, which are rich volcanic islands, agriculture is a huge potential for these bigger islands, if you want to call them that, bigger small islands. So that is something that is a plus for a country like Solomon Islands, that we have that potential to also be involved in quite scaled up agricultural production, if the support is there, if the technology is there and the capacity is there, and if the markets are there. So these are all factors that come into play. And I think we are also facing issues of shortage of food currently now, with the onset of climate change affecting particularly the low-lying atolls of Solomon Islands that are pretty much the same level of challenges that a country like Tuvalu faces, or Kiribati, more the low-lying islands as well. We're now having social issues as well, of some people trying to re-establish themselves on higher ground, literally, by moving from smaller islands, atolls, towards the bigger, more higher islands, and causing social instability as well. Those impact on issues concerning land use, land tenureship, customary land. These are issues that are very at the forefront of Solomon Islands thinking when it comes to anything to do with land, traditional land ownership, which makes up about 87% of Solomon Islands is owned by landowners culturally through tribal groups, and that impacts upon issues of agriculture and growth as well. So these are issues that can compound the challenges that SIDS already face for a country like Solomon Islands, the traditional cultural angles that come in, land ownership and tenureship issues can also be an issue. We have work that have been done for Solomon Islands with our friends, partners, the United Nations, organizations, NGO groups, and our bilateral partners in terms of resilient planting, looking at crops that are climate resilient, and trying to get them to get the people to be interested in planting those. That is something that is still to really catch on. I think there's a little bit of, for some of the crops, there's a little bit of capacity development that might need to be done for the villagers to perhaps change crops to what they're used to. These are issues that we're facing in terms of challenges as well. But the opportunity is there to still use some of our traditional crops and perhaps look at them and how to develop them in a more updated way that can still fulfill the role of nutrition for us. So our traditional crops and the traditional knowledge that has been there for centuries is something that I think needs support. Well, people used to make puddings, they call them 6 months pudding, that they keep. People make fun of them these days, but it's something that people bring out during the hard times. And they bring out and they eat those puddings made of root crops, things like that. That is already starting to be forgotten by the newer generation already. So those traditional things I would just like to flag are important for us as well. That those traditional knowledge, I think, need to have their place as well. I think in our conversations for some of our SIDS, particularly those of us in the Pacific, where the cultural affiliation to land and the spiritual attachment to the ocean and the land is quite a big part of it. So those are very Solomon-centric SIDS concerns that we have. There are also very useful and helpful developments in aquaculture in terms of that space as well. But once again, the uptake has been quite slow. People are not used to farming tilapia, things like that. They're more used to other fish in the ocean, not as much fresh fish. So there's a preference in the food choice as well there. So these are challenges that we face as we try and move and address these real concerns for us that we have in Solomon Islands and in many SIDS, particularly those in the Pacific.
Thank you very much. You've actually addressed one of the questions which I was going to put to you about some of the measures that you have been taking to address those food issues. So let me move on a little bit, because in your role as president of the OACP Parliamentary Assembly is also the influence of transcending the 38 SIDS constituencies. What is the message that you wish to put to policymakers and indeed donor partners in working with SIDS on innovative food solutions which have to be adapted to small island environments? Because you touched on one of the issues there, getting people to grow new crops alongside the ones which they're used to producing, but also perhaps changing that mindset as well. So what would you say to policymakers?
Yeah, I think, as president of the ACP Parliamentary Assembly, with our role there as oversight in terms of what happens by the executive, I think this is very, very important that we do have a role to play there, just to make sure that these programs of actions, as mentioned, in terms of the Samoa pathway, implementation of those that are already there. We always have problems with implementation. So many of the good ideas are already on the table. Our problem has always been on implementation. And for us, with the new ACP post-Cotonou agreement that we're looking to sign this year, there's going to be, I think, more important roles for parliaments. The ACP grouping are looking at regional parliaments as well, so that they're more tailor-made to their particular concerns, which has its advantages for sure, but it shouldn't take away, of course, from our solidarity as a group, ACP, and that's something that we will continue to push forward. One of the unique opportunities we have in ACP is the joint assembly with the European Union in particular. So the ACP/EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly, so-called JPA, is a unique opportunity whereby parliamentarians both from the ACP, which includes the SIDS, partner or can talk directly with our EU counterparts in the Parliament of the European Union. That is a unique opportunity, I feel, that these concerns can continue to be raised there, and getting to some concrete action is always good, but the idea of frameworks and policies that are already in place and the need to put some real implementation to them would be great. We had some great success of joint communique coming out of Scotland with COP26, whereby the EU parliamentarians and the ACP parliamentarians came out with one statement. And that is, I think, one of the unique opportunities that we have in ACP, that we can do that, particularly with the European Union.
Peter Cannalaria, thank you so much. Now, let me welcome our next speaker, and this is Her Excellency, Mrs. Josefa Leonel Correa-Sack. Now, she's the Commissioner for Rural Economy and Agriculture of the African Union Commission. We welcome you. Thank you for being here. Now, prior to her appointment, she was Special Advisor to the Angolan Minister of the Environment and the Minister of Agriculture. Now, Excellency, the floor is yours. I know that you are pushed for time, so I'm going to sit back and leave you to give us your speech.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, Juliet Foster. Good afternoon, every one of you from Addis Ababa. Excellencies, Ambassador, I can acknowledge the presence of Ambassador Jean-Paul Castro, the presence of my dear sister, Helena, Semedo, colleagues, panelists, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. Thank you, Juliet Foster, for the question, for giving me the floor. Let me also begin by thanking the organizer for the invitation to the African Union Commission to participate in this fourth section of the Global Small Island Developing State Leaders on a very topical issue. This theme of the debate is timely for the continent. As we all know, we just finished our 31st Ordinary Assembly of Head of State and Government at the African Union. Then we selected the theme of the year 2022 is strengthening resilience in nutrition and food security on the African continent, strengthening agro-food system, health and social protection system for the acceleration of human, social and economic capital development. So let me also have the opportunity to share with you the status of hunger and malnutrition in sub-Saharan Africa, and in particular in the SIDS. I know that my sister Semedo, Maria Semedo, has already given a very, very informative presentation. I will just go more on the policies that this organization, the African Union, that we are doing in terms of mitigating the effect of hunger and malnutrition on our continent. So sub-Saharan Africa is not on track to meet its development targets of ending all forms of hunger and malnutrition by 2030. This is the Sustainable Development Goal, and also the Malabo goals of 2025 to end hunger. Our third biannual review report that we just presented during our summit that just ended 3 days ago, this report was presented by the Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, who is the champion or coordinator of the flagship program CADEP, to the African head of states during the summit. It indicates that only one country, which is Rwanda, that is on track to meet hunger goal by 2025. This report is really an alert call that we need to really speed up our ambition, like as Helena said it very rightly, in order to really mitigate the impact of hunger and malnutrition to our population. In fact, hunger in sub-Saharan Africa is increasing across all the region, and almost 20% of the continent's population is undernourished, the highest in the world. The major challenges are the climate change, it was also said by colleague panelists, and the COVID-19, which push more 30 to 40 million people into poverty, revising the gain that we have made during the past 5 years, in the past 5 years. As some of you may be aware, the African Union has been partnering with FAO to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on food security and nutrition in Africa, beginning with our meeting with African Agriculture Minister in April 20, immediately after the occurrence of the pandemic of COVID-19. So we started taking action, and there is a political declaration that came out in order for us to really control and keep on, on track, so that we can not we cannot look at the disruption on the distribution side, value chain of our sector. The COVID-19 pandemic is threatening the food security and nutrition and the climate resilience of small island developing states, the SIDS, which share many threats, including a resilience on international trade and imported foods, high rate of malnutrition, and existential threats as a result of their vulnerability to climate change. We need to support those islands. It's very, very important. We are all following what is happening now in Madagascar, and 2 weeks ago it was the cyclone, and cyclones, I think they need special attention. That's why I commend the organizer to bring, to organize this video conference. There is an urgent need to tackle these economic and nutritional challenges through accelerated agricultural development. We need to work together to attend the African Union Team of the Year 2022, which is, as I said, strengthening resilience in nutrition and food security on the African continent in order to strengthen agro-food system, health, and the social protection system for the acceleration of human, social, and economic capital development. We are all aware we just have also another tool that we can really utilize, because we had the food system summit, the UN Food System Summit, who came about with a lot of recommendation, and we in the continent, in this region, we also had our common position, the only region globally that presented the common position with 53 game changing in order really to improve the situation of hunger and malnutrition on our continent. So what we need, the benefit of SIDS to food security and agriculture productivity cannot be overemphasized. Quality animal and the plant seeds are the foundation of agricultural productivity improvement, and well-functioning seed systems are critical to improve food and nutrition security, resilience, and livelihood of smallholder farmers in Africa. We need to design and scale up climate-smart seed policy that are sensitive to different soil composition and farm system. I think here I made a pledge to FAO to join us in this journey. On our part, the African Union produced a white paper which reviewed the effect of COVID-19 crisis on key aspects of the seed sector in Africa. It describes action by governments and other stakeholders in response to emerging challenges in the seed system sector. Building on the above, the paper concludes with short and medium-term recommendations to build resilient seed system, thereby strengthening food system serving Africa. We have also designed the African Seed and Biotechnology Program, our fourth STC, which is this Specialized Technical Committee, which is ministerial, held in December 2021, took note of the progress report on the implementation of the 10 years action plan of the African Seed and Biotechnology Program 2021-2030, and endorsed the African Seed and Biotechnology Platform and accompanying operation guidelines as the coordination mechanism for the implementation of the African Seed and Biotechnology Program. I thank you very much for your kind attention. Merci beaucoup pour votre attention. Muito obrigada.
Merci beaucoup, Excellency. I wonder if you can stay with us for one more minute, because I know that you do have to attend a meeting. There is a question which I would like to put to you very, very briefly. But I mean, you talked about the environmental challenges for SIDS in sub-Saharan Africa, and of course, those challenges compounded by COVID-19. But what about political instability in some countries? Has that also contributed to making seed systems perhaps more vulnerable?
Thank you for your question. We have a lot of challenges, as Helena said. We have a lot of challenges that is really disrupting our food system in Africa, and the conflict is one of the challenges that we have. That is why during our summit, with our head of state called for really peace, and we are going to organize a very an extraordinary summit in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, on terrorism, instability, and all these conflict issues that is hampering the development in our continent. So we have taken it into action, and then we're looking forward the outcome of this important extraordinary summit on terrorism and humanitarian. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and we wish you well with your conference. Let's move on now to our next speaker, who is the lawyer, political scientist, writer, public speaker, career diplomat. I think I'm really just skimming the surface of your career. His Excellency Mario Arvelo. Now, he's the ambassador of the Dominican Republic to the Food and Agriculture Organization. Excellency, it's very good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. The floor is now yours, and you have 5 minutes, around 5 minutes.
Thank you, Juliet, very much for your introduction. And I am very glad to be in a panel of such distinguished individuals who are also representing prestigious institutions from all over the world. I would like to give special thanks to Ambassador Carteron and Ambassador Doyle for opening the doors of the GSL, the group of SIDS leaders, and for inviting me to partake in this conversation. I am speaking right now from Santo Domingo. This is the capital of the Dominican Republic. Is where we like to say that all started, in the sense that this is the place where Christopher Columbus first set foot in the Americas, and this is where the European conquest of the Americas began taking place back in 1492. And we are part, together with our sister republic of Haiti, of a very small tropical island in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. I myself was born 200 meters from the coast. And this means that I grew up experiencing the destructive power of hurricanes and the tropical rains and sometimes the droughts, and all that has to do with the fact that we are a SIDS, a small island developing state. And let me just say that I am not only speaking from my experiences as a representative from the Dominican Republic, also having chaired the Committee on World Food Security and the Committee on Agriculture, both at FAO in Rome, I have learned a few things. A word about CFS. This is an inclusive structure. The CFS, the Committee on World Food Security, has not just, it's not just an intergovernmental institution. It also has civil society mechanism, research centers, international financial institutions, universities, and many other relevant actors in the discussion on food security and nutrition. In point of fact, our sponsor, Bayer, is an active participant in the private sector mechanism in exercise of their corporate social responsibility and, of course, their know-how in food systems. And I would like to refer briefly to the presence of Ambassador Kenny Lorea in the panel. He shows the importance of parliamentarians being brought into the equation, being brought into the discussion. This is a no-brainer because legislators have the authority to enact legal frameworks in the territories that they work in. And networks of parliamentarians against hunger, for instance, which is something that didn't exist 10, 12 years ago, now most countries have these mechanisms. And this is not just about, he said that he was speaking on a Solomon Island-centric frame of mind, but it is not, Ambassador. You made points that are valid for all SIDS, for all small island developing states, and I would like to follow up with you from an ACP perspective. The mechanisms working out of Brussels are doing a great job on this, and definitely this is something that we need to pursue. Ambassador Doyle, in his intervention, put the finger on, I would like also to mention briefly, on the larger problems that we face as SIDS, the remoteness of many of our islands, and that has consequences, time and money. It's not easy to hop on a plane from the middle of the Pacific or from the Caribbean or the Indian Ocean and arrive at the centers where these discussions are being made in Europe and in North America and elsewhere. When we talk about size, when Ambassador Doyle mentioned size, especially because we are islands, because there are other smallish countries like Belgium or the Netherlands or Switzerland, they are quite small, but they have a global presence. The point is that economic opportunities are scarce in small island developing states. And this in turn means that investment in infrastructure, for instance, is limited. We need to look at Tonga, what's happening in the aftermath of a devastating volcanic eruption followed by a tsunami, all of the problems that they are facing precisely because of lack of infrastructure. And Ambassador Doyle mentioned also the limited institutional capacity on the ground, and this is a function of population. We know that citizens of Nauru or Palau or Tuvalu number in the lower tens of thousands. So this is also a huge challenge. But I will add some political obstacles having to do with difficulties, for instance, of obtaining a visa to enter developed countries. It is not always easy to get a visa from one day to the next, or even from 1 week to the next, to, again, hop on a plane and spend a lot of time and a lot of money to get to discussions in Rome, for instance, because we need a Schengen visa, which is not easy to get, as opposed to developed country representatives and government officials that can make that trip just with their passport. So this is a challenge that we can overcome. Getting our collective voice heard in multilateral fora is something that we can address and that we can resolve on our own. Fragmentation is a huge problem that we can tackle through our own devices. I know for a fact, and this I discussed with Ambassador Sacco, who has had to leave, that we need to strengthen our political capital. I had many conversations with her, especially during a difficult period for me. Last year, I was coming out of a COVID infection, and I was running for a chair of the FAO Council, and she had, with enormous grace, she shared her knowledge of how things work in Africa and in the developing world. I would like to very briefly touch upon, I believe I have some seconds left from my turn, about Ms. Semedo. Maria Helena, we met, as she of course remembers, in Accra in Ghana back in 2009. She was working as regional director for the FAO in Africa. And she mentioned technical challenges, soils, biodiversity, pests, climate unpredictability. And the point that I want to make from her intervention is that we as ambassadors, we are well aware that FAO, as well as IFAD and WFP, all the whole UN family, they are looking out for us. They are looking out for the vulnerable countries, the SIDS. This is done at the macro level, from their secretariats in Rome and from the decentralized network that they have working in regional, country level. Later today, I'm meeting the FAO representative in the Dominican Republic, Mr. Castañeda. And in our agenda, we will be tackling how permanent representatives to the UN can also bring political pressure, not on the organization, because again, the organization, the FAO and the others, they are looking out for us. The point is that the developed countries, those that are fully represented with ambassadors on the ground, they are in the political fora within these organizations. They are taking the lead and they are looking out for themselves. We are an afterthought. And if you listen to their speeches, they all want to save the world, but saving themselves first. So there is a renewed attention in the wide world to the UN, especially in these times of pandemic. WHO is the face of the UN in fighting of the pandemic, and it is a crucial partner in food security because of its work on nutrition and food safety. But we need to ride that wave of consciousness. People all over the world are realizing that the enormous problems of our time require common solutions, and that we are underrepresented at the UN in terms of having representations on the ground, and this is something that we need to strengthen. So let us take a page from our gracious organizer, Ambassador Carteron and Ambassador Doyle, and let us hold hands together and increase the political capital that is dormant, and that we need to wake it up and be more forceful in Rome, in New York, in Geneva, in Paris, Vienna, Brussels, and Nairobi, and everywhere, at every place where the United Nations has Addis Ababa and so on, an office. We need to be there, and we need to make our voices heard. We have to speak strongly. Thank you, Juliet, very much for the time that you have conceded me.
Oh, well, thank you very much for that very powerful and heartfelt expression there. Strength in numbers, that lies at the root of it. And let's take that concept, because how can you use that strength in numbers, that amplified voice, to help small-scale producers in small island developing states like the Dominican Republic actually bring their products to market at a low cost, to be heard, to trade in a level playing field?
Well, this is something that goes beyond my remit, but this is something that my colleague, the Dominican ambassador in Geneva to the world, to the agencies dealing with commerce and trade, the World Trade Organization is the agency I was looking for. We face a number of non-tariff barriers, and this is no secret. FAO has been doing great work in policy advice for our countries, how to get the products from our countries to the world markets, but also helping our local capacities for feeding ourselves. This is something that is extremely difficult for small island developing states because we do not have the economies of scale. So we need to rely on niche products. In the case of the Dominican Republic, we are one of the largest world producers in, despite our smallish size, on cocoa and coffee made that are certified organic. But this is because we cannot compete with the larger producers in bulk. So this is something that, again, we need to make our voices heard, because FAO and others are looking out for us. But and I will finish with this, when you see at the representation of the Pacific Islands outside of New York, where everybody's represented, but outside of New York, what you see is that we have, as a region, they have, the Pacific region has political capital that is exercised by the larger countries, namely Australia and New Zealand. And they consult. I have been told that they consult with the Kiribati and Tokelau and Niue and the Marshall and Solomon Islands and so on and so forth. But in the end, what you hear is a speech that is very closely aligned with the US and Canada and the European Union and Japan and other developed countries. So what we need to do, again, is to get that strength in numbers into the ground, because like the little prince hopping from planet to planet, he found this king who said that he owned the stars because he counted them and wrote down the numbers of the stars. And the little prince told him, well, there's very little that you can do numbering the stars if they do not actually are useful. So it matters little if we are 38 or 40 small island developing states, if we do not convert those numbers into concrete actions at multilateral level.
Excellency, thank you so much for answering my question. Let's move on now, because Roramiso Mashumba is the CEO and founder of Monandi Africa. Now, this is an organization that helps rural women combat poverty and malnutrition by empowering and equipping them with skills and knowledge in agriculture. She is the chair of the Zimbabwe Farmers Union, and in 2020 was the winner of the prestigious Global Farmer Network Kleckner Award. Now, unfortunately, she cannot be with us, but she did send this video message earlier, where she explained why women are important in improving nutrition, health, and education, and the difficulties they face when they're trying to access the capital and resources to build and increase capacity. Roramiso Mashumba.
Hello. Women are very important to improving food and nutrition, because women in Zimbabwe and a greater part of Africa are the custodians of the soil. You find that most land is farmed by women. This is mainly a primary production. So these women, if they do not get access to the correct technologies, they're the ones who bear the burden of farming in hard conditions. Women also, you find in many cases, are breadwinners in their homes. They're the ones that fend for their children. They're the ones that take care of the family. So by supporting women to get access to better technologies, it's also supporting the whole community and supporting the children that they take care of. Women also have challenges of access to capital more compared to men, because you find that women also do not have collateral. Their names are not on title deeds. A lot of the times they don't have access to land. Their husbands are the ones that will have a title or access to the rural homestead. So therefore, if they were to look for a loan in a bank, they're able to access the loan. So women struggle more to get access to money, to farm, capital, equipment, in comparison to men. And you find women are the ones that would end up growing crops like horticulture crops, which are a bit more affordable compared to the high value crops, which they would also want to participate, but they're able to secure funding for. So they'll use recycled seed instead of better improved seeds, because they just cannot afford to buy inputs, even fertilizers. They also do not have access to knowledge, because you find that a lot of the times the girl child has to stay home and take care of her siblings instead of going to school. So there's quite a lot of barriers that women are faced on the continent, and which results in women being poorer in comparison to men. And in most cases, women are taught that they should eat last. So in a home, when a woman cooks, if there's not enough food, she first serves her husband. After she serves her husband, she feeds the children. If there's anything left, then she eats. So you find that women are malnourished because men are more superior in the community, or seen as more superior. So therefore, they have access to better food in comparison to women. And in some homes where it's patriarchal society and men have many wives, the younger wife, of course, she'll eat last.
Roramiso Mashumba there, thank you so much for that video feature, really looking at the role of women in agricultural communities and their importance in this whole thread, this whole tapestry which has evolved around seed production, feeding communities, granting them the self-sufficiency they require. Let's welcome our next speaker, who is the agronomist and Secretary General of the African Seed Trade Association, Justin Rakatuarisi. You have 5 minutes. It's very good to see you, by the way. And the floor is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. Good afternoon, everyone from Nairobi. And thank you for inviting me to participate in this meeting as a panelist. We will hear the voice of the private seed sector, because AFTA is representing the private sector in Africa. So I would like to talk about the constraint and the opportunity of the private seed sector, or the seed sector in general, so that we know or we understand why we would be like this, the situation. So I would put it in two categories for the constraint. The first one is the technical constraint, and the second one is socio-economic constraints. So what are the technical constraints? Let me start with saying that the public seed sector is not able to play well its role for various reasons, such as lack of seed infrastructure, and insufficiency of a skillful seed technician to carry out seed quality control, and they are not able to implement the harmonized regional seed regulations. There's also absence of plant variety protection systems in some countries and difficulty for its implementation where they exist, whereas this is very important for us. And most countries have a weak plant genetic resources exchange network with a lengthy variety release process. There is also limited development of new varieties, and this does not allow the African seed sector to keep pace with the rapid change in the global seed industry. For socioeconomic constraint, the seed market size is too small, and this does not allow to justify significant investment in the sector for a better seed trade. And absence of reliable statistics on the African seed sector, which allows a good planning. This is tremendously lacking in Africa, despite the fact that we try to address it through our National Seed Trade Association. There's also difficulty of accessing to capital for small and medium private seed sector companies actually to develop and improve their operation, whereas they play an active role and an important one to serve the farmer in a niche region. There is also a distortion of the seed market due to poorly managed seed subsidies and undermining the private seed industry, because we have planned production and all of a sudden there's a seed coming from nowhere and it's not sold from the formal. Then there's also difficulty for accessing to credit to procure agricultural input, including seed for small farmers, who are still the majority of farmers in the continent. Those are the constraints. And what are the opportunities? Because opportunities do exist. There are continuous efforts for the effective implementation of the harmonized seed regulations by the regional economic communities, ECOWAS, COMESA, SADC, and DIC, and the African Union with this relatively new African continental free trade area, and all of those will increase the size of the seed market. And we have, after a good cooperation with all of those organizations, and we thank them for accepting us to give our idea from time to time in their document. There's also the availability of the seed technology to accelerate the research to develop better variety in order to meet the need of diversified agroecological zones in the continent. We do need, because our continent has many, many agroecological zones and very diversified. There is also ongoing public-private partnership, such as licensing of variety from the narrow National Agricultural Research Organization, and instead of remaining with the public, because they are not able to take it to farmer, they are doing this licensing. There is also the fact that development partners or donors are still interested in African seed sector development in various forms. And there's a continued effort by international and regional organizations such as WIPOV, WAPEI, ARIPO, to promote plant variety protection in Africa, to motivate the breeding. We know very well that the budget allocated to the breeding, to the research, becomes less and less from the public sector, and we need the private sector to take over for this breeding. And the last but not least, the existence of the Seed Trade Association at national, at regional, and even the global level, because they allow the private seed sector to discuss among themselves about issues within the seed industry and advocate for an enabling environment in which they can operate more efficiently to avail quality seed to farmers, which is the ultimate goal. The fact remains that there is high seed demand in Africa, but it's not solvable, meaning they are not backed up by purchasing power. And we heard from FAO that it's 30% in Africa, the adoption rate of formal seed, but I think we need to categorize, because for some crop it's already very high, such as maize, because this is a staple food. And there is a challenge to avail quality seed to farmers in the continent, because seed demand is derived demand meaning if the produce is not attractive and used by the consumer, there's no motivation to spend money to buy quality seed and other agricultural input to improve production. Indeed, the experience shows that where there is commercial outlet for the produce, the adoption of high quality seed and other technical technology is higher. There is a need, therefore, to coordinate and support the entire value chain, right from the research and development to the produce market output. Because if we focus only on seed as such, we will lose this derivability from the price of the produce. Then I would like to end my speech by saying that it's gratifying, though, that the continent has potential to grow and improve its agriculture in general, and the seed sector in particular, with around 60% of the Arab land in the world in Africa. So thank you for listening, and again, we do hope that despite of the problem or the challenges in Africa mainland and the small island developing states, we are still hopeful that we will be able to do something for its improvement for the food security of the fast growing population. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Justin. I want to, there's a lot there in what you said. There's one particular thing which really stood out for me, and that's the size of the seeds sector. Does that largely underpin one of the reasons why, even though we have seen a great deal of work in developing seeds that are resistant to severe climate change, the technology that's gone into this, etc., that this is perhaps one of the reasons, the size of the sector, that we haven't seen this big rollout of that technology, the adoption of what it has produced, because clearly this is an issue. The SIDS, the sub-Saharan African countries, they are working together. But it does appear from what you've said as if combined with everything else, it comes down to the size of the sector. In other words, how if it's a large sector, it can exert clout, things can be done more quickly.
Okay, thank you. The size is one, but I would say that in my opinion, there are two main reasons why it's like this. The first one is the affordability of the seed. That means it's relatively expensive for the subsistence farmer, and who, as we know, mainly grow for their consumption only, and they can't afford to buy the good seed then. And two, the availability of seed at the right time and at the right place for farmers. Because if we don't have enough dealer network, it will be difficult for seed to reach to the farmers. And also sometimes there is like a social resistance to the technology, like plant breeding innovation, genetically modified crop, and so on. So these points I've just mentioned, in my opinion, contribute to the fact that there is technology, there is quality seed, private sector is ready to produce seed, but with this non-affordability and non-availability, with social resistance to some technology, this is, in my opinion, the reason why it's not really going on well.
Okay, then, Justin, thank you so much for that. A lot of the things which you mentioned, they will be picked up, no doubt, by our final speaker, Mark Edge. Now, he's the Director of Partnerships, Seeds and Traits Business Development for LMIC at Bayer Crop Science. Mark, it's very good to see you. The floor is now yours, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Juliet. It's a real pleasure to be here. I first want to thank the small island developing state leaders for their leadership and collaboration with Bayer, bringing us together to share insights and perspectives on this important topic of enhancing seed systems to benefit smallholder farmers. We really do have a shared objectives that truly are about seeds for all and hunger for none. So, Excellencies, ministers, distinguished officials, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to share with you a few of my perspectives on this topic. I'm going to start out with letting you know that my career has been centered on getting better seeds to farmers. Seed has always been a personal passion of mine because I grew up on a farm and my family still farms. Planting quality seed with the best yield potential has always been one of our most critical choices to improve our odds for producing more while using less. And it's important to keep in mind that every farmer everywhere really always tries to produce more using less because that's their basic business model. So in agriculture everywhere, it always starts with the farmer. Today, we're focused on smallholder farmers. And when it comes to seeds, smallholder farmers want and need the same things farmers everywhere need from their seed. They need seed that is adapted to their local conditions, has good quality, disease and stress tolerance, and with the best yield potential. But they also need a seed system that can deliver access to the improved quality seeds at an affordable price. Now, it's when we get to these issues about seed systems where the global disparities and gaps become painfully obvious. And unfortunately, there's no simple answers or solutions. But there are some commonalities to the challenges that we faced in the low and middle income countries, the LMICs, whether we're talking about Africa or small island developing states. So I've been working to help improve maize seed systems in Africa for the past 10 years, bringing Bayer's business perspective and acumen to public-private partnerships to address seed systems challenges. My experience has informed my opinion that developing seed systems for impact at scale with climate-smart seed hinges on basically three things. First, it's partnerships. Secondly, it's about quality seed that delivers value and reduces risks for the farmers. And lastly, it's about sustainable and holistic systems-based approaches for the seed systems. So I want to start out with calling particular attention to partnerships, because for low and middle income countries, it's clear that sustainable, holistic seed systems cannot be created by the private sector acting alone. Multi-stakeholder partnerships bringing together organizations like FAO, UNESCO, the EU, and AU, together with state governments, the National Agricultural Research Services, or the NARS, and development organizations like the One CGIAR, all while collaborating with the private sector. Those things are what's required to create the political will, establish the enabling environment, and formalize the economic incentives for holistic seed systems to thrive and be sustainable. At Bayer, we're working in public-private partnerships to try to achieve those objectives. For example, the Taylor Maize Project, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and USAID, has been ongoing since 2008. And together with CIMMYT, AATF, and 7 NARS in Africa, we've been working together to develop better seeds. We first identified that African farmers want and need better climate-smart maize seed with drought tolerance and insect resistance. So we developed improved seed in a joint breeding program, working closely with CIMMYT and the NARS, and we're now at the stage of scaling up with African-owned seed companies. It's important to emphasize there that it's through the existing African seed companies that will deliver that improved seed to those farmers. So to name just a few other of our public-private partnerships, in 2020, we started the Modern Breeding Project, working with the One CGR in Africa to improve cassava, yams, bananas, and cowpeas, together with maize and soybeans. We're identifying the main threats to those crops for African farmers and breeding to find solutions, solving the problems that the farmers face. Another example is that we support Plant Breeders Without Borders. This is an organization of plant breeders who transfer knowledge about underutilized species, working together with smallholder farmers to develop better varieties more suited to them. The focus there is really about the transfer of the knowledge. How do you get the local knowledge done at the local level? They have done work in Indonesia in Bambara groundnut, which is a crop that I have never had any experience with, but I understand it's got certain fit that's very appropriate for small and island developing states. And they're planning a training session in Fiji later this year that will include 27 member countries from South Pacific community. So I could go on for hours about all the great opportunities that we see to improve seed and make a sustainable impact at scale. But let me conclude this formal part of my presentation by summarizing that seed and seed systems are complex topics with many nuances, and the devil is in the details. So I hope that from our dialogue today that we can gain a better understanding of the framework necessary for effective collaborations to dig into those nuances and details so that we can deliver access to improved quality seeds at an affordable price to smallholder farmers in small island developing states. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. And yes, the devil is in the detail, but that shouldn't thwart the ambition. Let me add that point as well. But I mean, look, what you've outlined, again, it's really interesting about the partnerships, and that's something which I hope would allude to in the general conversation as well. But I mean, how do companies like Bayer, you know, with the knowledge that you have, actually help farmers build those systems to not just deliver on food security, but also health as well?
Oh, those are very important questions, Julieta. And I think I start out always, as I mentioned, I grew up on a farm and I still am very connected with farming. And so talk about farming, changing farmers' behavior. And to change farmers' behavior, you first need to understand what problems they face at their local level. And then you have to understand why it is that they're using their current farming practices. So those issues around sustainability of whatever it is that the farmer needs to be more sustainable and produce a nutritious crop, those same sustainability things that affect everybody are the same for farmers. They have to be economically viable, they have to be environmentally benign, and they have to be culturally acceptable. So generally speaking, when we talk about farmers, their challenges center around the profitability and the environmental impact pieces that they're doing. So they often lack knowledges and resources to effectively adopt those new innovations and practices to change their ways and start producing more using less. So at Bayer, as a global leader in R&D, what we try to do is address those problems that the farmers face and figure out what it is that's going to help them change their behaviors. Why would they do something differently? And that's a really complex challenge to do, but it starts with creating better products first, and that really make a difference for the farmer, and then understanding what it is that will help that farmer adopt those things. So we use the traditional techniques of plant breeding, plus we stay at the cutting edge of all of these new technologies of molecular breeding of, let's say, for example, CRISPR, or applying artificial intelligence to this development of new seed products, making sure that we're developing the products that work for the farmers that are going to make a change in the value that they purchase. We're only successful if we deliver farmers something that's actually valuable that they'll come back and purchase again. So the focus really has to be on creating products that bring value to that farmer. So we're engaging in these multi-stakeholder collaborations to do our part to transfer the knowledge and the capacity, because it's certainly far bigger and more than any one company can do on its own. There's always these many issues that have been addressed by the distinguished speakers before me that have shown what challenges we face. But the main takeaway here, I think, is that there is tremendous progress that can be made if you keep the farmer at the center and talk about delivering value to that farmer to improve their productivity. They can produce more using less in the low and middle income countries, including the small and island developing states. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mark Edge. And indeed, I'd like to extend the thanks to all the panelists for their excellent contributions. Now, we're not done yet because there are some further questions which I would like to put to you. Again, please do feel free to join in, panelists. If there's something you wish to add to something that one of your fellow panelists has had to say, then please go for it. Now, I want to start by putting the opening question, in fact, to Ambassador Doyle, rather fitting, in fact, because you started things. So this is now your chance to come back into the conversation. But look, overall, from what you've heard and from what you see on the front line, what is it that the small island developing states can learn from sub-Saharan Africa about food security solutions and seed distribution? And just another add-on to that, have we now reached the stage where we recognize that food and water security are one of the same, well, the one side of the same coin, basically? You cannot treat them individually.
Yeah, thank you, Jet. Look, my first statement, just to refer to Marie-Hélène Semedo's comment, very significant comment, that 60% of food items, including agricultural produce, are imported by SIDS. That's a huge, significant factor. And in fact, in certain of the smaller microstates, this figure rises to about 80%. So I think, you know, the first, if you like, policy orientation that governments need to take in cooperation with the UN family of organizations is to look at import substitution policies. So we need to move away from the over-reliance on imported food and agricultural produce. That's number one. The second, I think, critical question, and it can't be emphasized enough, is the importance and the necessity of food, water, and ecosystems not being viewed as separate entities in terms of dealing with and addressing these issues. They are treated too often in a silo fashion, which means that we have less than optimal solutions that only address food or agricultural produce, regardless of how innovative the seed technology that we are developing is going to be. If it's not linked to the scarcity and the stress levels of water across all of the small island developing states, it will be suboptimal. So that's, I think, a very important point to make. And clearly, over the past 2 years, because of COVID-19, we have been sharply reminded in the islands of just how vulnerable the water security has become. It has raised the level of urgency surrounding water security to a point where in St. Kitts and Nevis and many of the surrounding Caribbean islands are actually restricting water from a certain time every evening. I mean, this has been going on for the last 3 or 4 years. So SIDS governments, I think, also are beginning to recognize the critical role of water in food production and food security. In the Caribbean region, and indeed I believe in the Pacific, we still suffer from inadequate supply of water for agriculture, but this fuels, this lack of water security fuels a number of conflicts in different areas, including agriculture, hydroelectricity, drinking water, sanitation, which all compete for scarce resources. Now, the contributing factors, I think, are pretty well documented now. We know that the sea level rises that are so indelibly associated with island states leads to saltwater intrusion into coastal aquifers. It also affects groundwater quality, and more importantly, it contributes to contamination, which is actually very high. Now, not only that, but add to that the results of a sort of desertification of fertile land. Literally, fertile land, because of the intrusion of salt water, becomes, mini deserts, which are difficult to cultivate. Now, going forward, you've asked the question, what should we be doing? Well, there are a couple of things we could be doing. One, we could be looking with the FAO, but also with other UN family organizations that are associated with water, UNDP, UNEP, UNESCO, the WMO, to mention but a few, in looking at ways of improving water use efficiency in supporting agriculture through things like drip irrigation, irrigation scheduling, rotational grazing, water harvesting, rain catchment systems. This is not rocket science. The techniques exist, but we need to work together to do this. And desalinization is another important, I think, area. But sadly, it's only a partial solution because it's hugely expensive, and actually 90% of the desalinization capacity exists only in high income countries going forward. But my final, I think, message is this: not alone do we need to heighten the importance of the Sustainable Development Goal number 2 that you've mentioned, Juliet, relating to eliminating hunger, but also the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which raises the question of access to water and clean water and sanitation. The two need to be intertwined, interlinked to find optimal solutions going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So really, we need to end the silo system if we're to actually achieve the goal of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal that we referenced at the beginning. But again, I want to throw this point out to everybody, because look, one of the things that we have talked about is learning. Yeah. And given that, I want to reference Asia. In fact, one of our speakers did reference Asia earlier. And I want to look at Asian vegetable production and consumption because it increased during the 1990s, or really from the 1990s, because you had a huge seed industry working hand in hand with the private sector. So what are the lessons that small island developing states can actually take from the Asian experience? Peter Cannalaria, can I throw that to you first and then get the response of other panel members if they wish to contribute?
Yes, I think for us in the Pacific, we very much follow closely the developments in Asia, and as much as possible try to emulate where we can. But I think context is very important as well. There are some great ideas that are implementable in Asia, but are a bit difficult to do in a small island setting as well. So the tailoring and the contextualizing is very important. And when we talk about private sector, in many small islands, it's really almost non-existent. It's a very smallholder farmers trying to survive, many of them, and then the surplus they try to sell in the local markets. So it's the whole imagery shifts a little bit when we start talking about SIDS challenges when it comes to that. But of course the ideas that are there can be tailored, I think, in terms of adopted and then to the settings for small islands. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much for that. And can I get the response of you, Justin? I mean, look, because I'm sure that in your work, people say, well, look, let's learn from Asia. I'm sure there are things that we can take from their experience to replicate a similar result. I mean, what's your take on this, again, as someone in the front line?
Yeah, let me say that in the tropical area, there are some crops, some species for which we cannot produce seed, like carrot, cabbage. So that implies we have to import it from the other area. Two, the small island, maybe at the exception of Madagascar, which is very big. I'm from Madagascar. The topography is a big problem, and then the availability of the arable land. So I would say producing a seed for this is not really making sense, but production of vegetable for consumption is very good because you can do it anywhere, within a pot. So for me, it's good to learn from Asia, but take into consideration the reality in those small islands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mario Arvelo, would you care to add to that?
Of course. I would go back to what was said before about the solutions. FAO, among other UN agencies, look at what's happening on the ground. We spoke about the Solomon Islands, and now we're talking about Madagascar. There's a number of solutions that in many Asian countries, like you said, Juliet, have been put in place, and we can all learn from there. There are adjustments that need to be made in terms of the appropriateness of climate and the cultural, the cultural imperatives of production, the soils, the precipitation, and so on. But one thing that I have learned in my tenure as a representative to the UN in Rome, to very technical organizations, having to read some of the papers, which to non-agronomists like myself, sometimes they may be a bit boring or somewhat arid. But in the end, in listening to all these discussions, one learns something. And that is that there are good practices in place. There are countries that are making the most. We heard about Rwanda earlier from Ambassador Sacco. It is a success story. The private sector, and I mentioned Bayer again, is supporting a number of initiatives. The civil society is shining a light on this. Farmers associations, gender issues, youth are being all brought in together, and we are finding solutions. The important thing is to know what's going on in the ground, and also the knowledge on how to replicate this so that the yields augment, so that these best practices can be implemented in as many places as possible as we continue onwards in the fight against hunger and malnutrition.
And let's continue with the theme of partnerships. We talked a great deal about that because we know that for a partnership to succeed, it's not just finding the right people to work for. It's also important that smallholder farmers are actually included and not sidelined in the agricultural narrative. So Maria Helena Semedo, how do you ensure that that doesn't happen? In other words, that the voice of the farmer is never lost? Oh, I'm afraid we seem to have lost her. That's a great shame. Never mind, never mind. Let me throw that question out to the other members of the panel, and that is the point that partnerships are good, but you don't want to lose the farmer. You can't afford to sideline them. Their voice is authentic. It needs to be heard. So I'm going to throw that out. Who would like to tackle that point?
I can try to take that,
Go for
Juliet.
it,
I would just say that, first of all, we always have to start with the farmer in mind and say, what are the challenges that they face and what are the problems we're trying to solve? And it's those farmers' challenges that we're facing, whether it's a disease, whether it's low quality seed. There's so many different things that there are there. And so it's really about a holistic systems-based approach where you think about demand driving the market, that you also have to create products that are going to yield better, that are going to produce more using less, so that their cost of production goes down. But there's this whole transfer of knowledge that has to go with it as well, to be able to say, well, it's not enough to just create the better seed. You also have to know how to plant the seed and or what conditions and how to manage that. So the agronomic advice, and this is where the partnerships come in, is that no one organization has all of the answers, but when you work together, for example, if we're working with the government, then they're good at they should be or can be good at the extension of reaching out to those farmers and teaching them what needs to be done. But they may not have the capacity to create the actual new product because of the research that needs to be done. So putting those pieces of the puzzle together and working together to solve the problems of the farmers is the driver there, because that's about adding value. And then the consumer at the end will also get the better value because they're going to get a better product at the end. So try to put all of those systems together. The challenge is where to start and how to get it going, but it is definitely possible, and we have many examples where it is working.
And again, a question to throw out to our remaining panelists, because I know that some of them have had to leave because they're very, very busy. But I mean, the reference was made earlier to GM crops. Now, it's hugely controversial in the United Kingdom and indeed other countries as well. But is there likely to be a similar resistance in small island developing states, this fear that you're introducing something which, because of the way that it's been produced, the perception that it's been manufactured in a laboratory, the worry about side effects and the potential to perhaps undermine traditional ways of farming? Let me start with Peter Cannalaria. And again, if the other panelists would wish to participate, please do go ahead.
Thank you, Juliet. I think just to finish a loop on the previous question for FAO, I think previously I was with the UN as well. So they launched this SIDS platform in Samoa that looks at exchange of sharing of ideas. So I think they've got this platform out there that is helping some farmers, at least, in terms of sharing ideas within SIDS themselves. So that has been useful to a certain extent. When it comes to GMO, there's this issue of perception that is there. Many small islands have very unique biodiversity, endemic to these small islands. The flora and fauna are found nowhere else. So Solomon Islands is very much a high biodiversity country. So these issues of genetically modified and that it's always going to have a perception that we will need to overcome to enable to get these newer ideas on the ground. And I think if the messaging is done properly, there will be appetite for adopting newer crops, newer technologies. Maybe it's the same crops, but doing it better and more efficiently. Those sorts of things. But that is something that I have already seen in my constituency itself. With the farmers there, 80% of Solomon Islanders are subsistence farmers. So you will have to work with them to create this space in terms of perhaps adopting newer, more energy efficient, efficient, resilient crops, and build up the volume and outputs as well. But yeah, just that part of it with the unique flora and fauna issue, there's a need for messaging to overcome that perception.
Yeah, so obviously the messaging key to it, and presumably that's a point that you, Mario Arvelo, would also support. Get the messaging right. It strips away the trepidation.
Yes, absolutely. It is a problem of perception. It is a very controversial issue, as you said. I have yet to see any scientific paper that is peer-reviewed that would establish, without a doubt, with a scientific consensus, that GMO is bad for you. But there's a lot writing on this. I do not want to get into the specifics or the private sector components of this. The fact is that GMOs are being used where they are being used. They are contributing greatly to the fight against hunger and malnutrition. And GMOs, as per the papers that I have seen that are in the public domain, are crucial for this fight against hunger and malnutrition. This public perception needs to also be addressed because it is important. In that same manner, the preferences of the consumer need to be respected. And if there's a negative perception around GMOs, then this needs to be tackled with scientific reasoning. And of course, I am not adding anything about the cultural or religious impediments. That's a whole different subject. And I am not talking about that. Just as an example about how GMOs in this particular instance need to be taken into consideration, these negative perceptions. And the only way that we can do that is with the appropriate campaign of education for the consumers to show them in the same manner that we're doing with the vaccines. People are saying that they do not want to get a vaccine against COVID-19 because the vaccine will kill them. And this is nonsense. But the point is that we need to get the scientific information out in the same manner, and this is a much better example, in the same manner as we're doing with the vaccines for the GMOs.
And let's sort of close out this issue and indeed the debate, because look, the bottom line is that what we're talking about, if we're going to look at the GMOs, is within the context of partnership, not losing sight of the end goal to feed people in very vulnerable countries through no fault of their own because of their geography and the other issues which go with that. And I know that Ambassador Doyle, you want to close this out by addressing that very point.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Look, I just wanted to pick up on this very interesting last exchange about the need to integrate subsistence farmers in any solution going forward. I know that Ambassador Castro from the Solomon Islands would want me to make this point because it's central to the whole global SIDS leaders concept that we've developed, which is the need to look at not just the bottom-up approach, but also the top-down approach in terms of finding solutions to the challenges faced by SIDS, whether it be in the field of agriculture or seed production. And what I'm referring to here is the need for a new approach, perhaps a tripartite approach, which includes the governments from the SIDS region, all 38 of those governments, plus the local farmers, the cooperatives, the associations representing that farming constituency, and critically the key UN family of organizations, notably the FAO, UNESCO, UNEDP, UNEN, and even the MTO. All of these organizations need to be brought into this debate to find optimal solutions on a tripartite basis. That is the only way we're going to resolve this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And really a thoughtful note on which to end this discussion. It really has been quite fascinating and really broadening things out and stressing the importance of countries working together. It's incredibly reassuring to know that there are bodies within the European Union and indeed in the United Nations who are working with SIDS states and also those in the sub-Saharan African mainland. The process of learning is also continuing, but silo thinking needs to be challenged, something which was raised, and also the importance of hearing the voices of these countries. They have so much to give and they face a huge challenge. It's very easy to look at that challenge far away, but when you have to live with that and the consequences of inaction, it really does focus the mind. So thank you so much for those of you who have taken part in today's discussion. We appreciate your contribution and we look forward to seeing you, well, hearing from you again in the not too distant future. Because remember, the small island developing states, this is their time. Their voices are being heard. It's time for all of us to listen and to work together. Thank you.